Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Darren and I feel like it's time to almost wrap it up. I got another video where I want to rank a bunch of classes, but in this one, I want to take a look at all the strength DPS classes. Now, I will let you guys know this. There was a lot of frustration trying to do this one because at the time of recording a majority of these, a lot of the boomkins were running around and doing ridiculous amounts of damage. Chances are, if you're somebody who follows my channel, you've already seen the video proving just how much strong damage they're putting out. And if you're somebody who be engaged in streams, I mean, it's called balanced druid, so it cannot be overpowered. It's obviously balanced, you guys. But it's been very, very frustrating testing out a lot of these classes, and I did not really have the most amount of time on them. I feel like I got the general gist of them, so that's the most I can give you guys. I still want to make one more video talking mostly about healers, which I think for PvE it's going to be a lot easier. For PvP, I'm not even going to touch that beast. But here's my video on all the strength DPS classes for PvP with a little bit of PvE flavor to it, in terms of comparing them, contrasting them against one another, and ultimately ranking them in which ones I personally like the most and least. So this is very, very opinion based for a video. Anyway, let's get on with the show. To start us off the bat, we're gonna go with Arms Warrior, probably the most staple DPS out of strength classes in the game. Off the bat, I will say this, with the GCD thing being a thing in BFA, the whole GCD setup, Arms just has such a long wind up for its abilities that it's a little bit jarring. And this is something that I felt like Arms and Fury, both in Legion, have been able to kind of execute abilities going from a charge into a big burst phase, and it felt smooth. Now it feels like there's a lot of setup. Not just because of the DCD, but because of how they redesigned Arms Warrior. Arms Warrior now uses the ability of Overpower, which it's nice to have a lot more abilities in your bars, but now you're using Overpower in order to buff your next Mortal Strike. So if you're somebody who's doing PvE, you're charging to the enemy, probably gonna hit Overpower, then you're gonna hit Colossus Smash, then Mortal Strike for that extra damage, and then dump whatever rage you have into Mortal Strikes, resets of Overpower, as well as slams. If you're playing PvP, however, this is where it gets a little bit silly. You get to charge into the enemy, then you gotta hamstring so they don't run away from you, and trust me, you want to do that. Then you want to Overpower, then you want to hit Colossus Smash, then Mortal Strike, and there's so many things can happen in just your basic setup. It feels a little bit silly to some extent. I mean, it's fine in terms of damage. You end up pushing out actually fairly decent damage, as the setup I feel like takes a little bit too long, and it's very, very noticeable on Warrior, something I don't really notice nearly as bad on a lot of other classes. Also, for stats, I was having a very, very hard time with Warrior. I feel like off the bat, if I play Specialization and I'm having such a hard time getting proper stats with it, chances are I'm not really going to be too into it. With Warriors and how they got changed up with their new Mastery, Mortal Strike, Blade Storm all apply a bleed now that deals a fair amount of damage. Mastery increases the damage of that bleed. It lasts for 6 seconds. That damage is good, but now your Mastery stacks bleed, so I guess, are you supposed to stack haste for auto attack so you can get more rage? Are you supposed to stack crit for more crit? Maybe versatility so Mortal Strikes do more damage. I feel like with this change there's going to be a lot of questions of what is a good stat. So off the bat I had such a hard time trying to figure out what's good, and it was very, very weird. I feel like Mortal Strike is the majority of your damage, but it still feels really, really cool to be able to kind of wind it up. While I don't like the whole long setup with, you know, Overpower, Mortal Strike, if you are able to get that execute in there, you know, maybe take a talent where 2 Overpowers into Colossus Smash, into, let's say, PvP Sharpen Blade, and then big ol' Mortal Strike, that feels really, really cool to be able to chop the enemy in half like that. Blade Storm is also a very, very powerful utility for Arms Warriors, and I feel like for Arms Warriors in general, it might be the specialization out of all 3 Warrior specs, or majority of the strength classes, with a very, very simple setup. You want to do single target and or AoE? Just pop Blade Storm. It does a lot of damage no matter what you do. Just Mortal Strike on cooldown, Overpower, and Colossus Smash whenever that's up, and that's really more or less how you play Warrior. So I feel like it's going to be a good staple for strength classes. I wouldn't say it's the most interesting in terms of setup. You can't go crazy wombo combo in there. It's very simple, but also very, very decent. I feel like a lot of people end up playing it for PvP because of the Mortal Strike effect that it applies from your Mortal Strike, where enemies take less healing, so it's very, very powerful right now on BFA, so it's always going to have a place in PvP. As for the PvE side, Arms Wars I feel like are going to bring very, very strong damage when it comes to cleave, be it from Blade Storm, be it from Mortal Strike, Sweeper Strikes hits, the big executes. I feel like the specialization is going to be very, very powerful. It is very hard to see if Arms or Fury is going to be powerful because generally people just switch to one spec or the other. There's not really that much variety of warriors that end up running raids or dungeons. But if anything, Arms Warriors is looking really solid. Even if it's very, very simple, it's looking very, very solid. The next specialization on the list is Frost Death Knight, and I've had so many questions on Frost. I don't hate it. It's not a bad class. Generally, Frost actually feels really good to play. I just have a lot of questions in terms of, I guess, some things that Blizzard, if they were to change, might make it feel really good. This is actually a pretty good example of a class that's sort of kind of well designed. I just have a lot of questions of what's up with more sources of damage. So, Frost Death Knight, your Obliterates and Frost Strikes are not hitting for a lot. And this is a very similar situation to Fire Mage, where Fire Mage Pyroblast procs, where you get on those instacast pyros, when those hit hard, that feels good. So what I really like about a lot of classes is, as they're designed to, let's say, play to a certain playstyle, like Fire Mages, if you get a crit, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, bam! Why are you doing all these crits? Why are you going to play the playstyle of the instacast Pyroblast? Well, if the answer is to deal damage and you're seeing bigger numbers on your screen, that feels very exciting. That's like, okay, I'm playing the spec right because I'm doing more damage, because I'm playing the mechanic. It's a very nice feedback back to your brain from the game, and feels really good to execute. When it comes to Frost Death Knights, you are trying to line up the crits for your Obliterates. You're trying to kind of mingle and mix and match between Obliterates and Frost Strikes, so you always have Frost Strikes to, you know, while you're waiting for the Obliterate crits, and you're trying to save those Obliterates there and not spend all the resources so you can get those crits back in. So you're playing the playstyle, and you're not really getting the feedback, as both of those abilities don't really hit hard at all. Like, the spec still has a lot of damage, it's just your basic abilities of Obliterate and Frost Strikes are tickling, which feels a little silly. On top of that, what's weird about the spec is the dot damage of it from your disease, from your Howling Blast, actually hits for a lot. Like, this is just, I don't know if that's intended, but it actually, on average, it ended up hitting more than some of the dot classes I ended up playing. And I'm talking about Shadow Priest, I'm talking about, maybe not Boomkins, but Shadow Priest and even Affliction Warlocks. Those are classes that are all heavy about dots, but even the average damage over time of those dots wasn't quite as exciting as the Frost Death Knight dots, which is the weird, because I never thought of Frost Death Knight as a damage over time class. You also have two big talents in your, I guess, repertoire that deal insane amounts of damage. One is Frostwyrm's Fury, where a big dragon flies from the sky, bombards the enemy. It looks awesome, but the amount of damage, out of like how much of your damage that is such a huge burst, and it basically, that's where the majority of your damage comes from when it comes to trying to deal damage to multiple enemies. Another one is a legendary from a chest Lego, where now your Chains of Ice becomes an ability that deals damage as well. It has a 20 stack, and once a 20 stack, it can crit for a lot. So when you're popping cooldowns together, get the Chains of Ice crit, get the Dragon Strike crit, and that's a lot of damage that you can execute into one single person. So it feels weird that there's so much potential and so much fixating on your big bursty abilities when it comes to damage, as well as your damage over time, but your abilities like Obliterate and Frost Strikes are hidden for so little. It just feels very weird when it comes to playing it. The spec feels great, it feels fun to run around, it feels fun to use your abilities, but when you're like trying to obliterate, you get in those procs, Frost Strikes, and they're not doing that much damage. And then next second you turn around and Chains of Ice an enemy for half their health, and Dragon Airstrike from the other half their health. It feels mismatched. It feels like there's a little bit too much damage in your burst and not enough damage in your sustain. And a lot of people have told me that maybe I should try different talents, but I feel like when you have a specialization where you have to try to fix your own spec through talents, that's where it doesn't feel that great. So I feel that it definitely has a little bit of work. I feel like rebalancing some numbers, maybe take a little bit out of the burst, put it back into Obliterate and Frost Strikes would make the spec feel really good. But besides that, it still hits really hard, and if that's how people want to play, that's fine. To me, it just felt really awkward, although I still would rate Frost DK in the upper tier. The next class on the list is Red Paladin, and what can I say about Red besides it was awesome? It felt great, a very well designed strength class in the game, and of course, it's not overpowered. Now, let's just talk about what Red's all about. You got a lot of awesome new spells and abilities through talents. You got your execute mechanic back, you got some of your other mechanics that you used to have in terms of how you generate your resources, maybe how you want to AoE, and maybe even how you want to heal. And I feel like Blizzard gave you a lot of interesting options, and I didn't get to play around with all of them. I really just picked the options I really liked and just kind of ran with them. The specialization of Retribution Paladin is very squishy, like you just die very quickly. If you're ever in a battleground and you have warlocks and mages chasing after you, they're probably chasing after a Retribution Paladin because they know who's gonna be the squishiest. But you also have this very nice feeling of glass cannon. You have nice, good, reliable damage every time I go into a fight as a Retribution Paladin. As long as I had a healer or I could press my bubble at the right time. I felt like I had the situation more or less under control, but even then there were moments where people would swap onto me, and it was kind of cool to have that dangerous feeling of, oh, I can really die very quickly, but I can also dish out a lot of damage, so it feels kind of balanced on that regard. Overall, what I liked about Red Pally is the strong utility that you have for your team. Hand of freedoms, taking off diseases off them, maybe even popping a heal to your whole team. Strong heals whenever needed felt really cool. You are limited by resources, and you have pretty long GCD or even cooldown on a lot of those heals, so it doesn't feel like it's a little overextending in terms of, I guess, it's overreach for Retribution Paladin. Overall, I'll be honest, I came into thinking about Red Pally thinking, oh, it's another overtuned class, oh, they're gonna be really strong. They're really strong in Legion, so I'm probably not gonna enjoy running into them in BFA. And actually playing as one of them felt very enjoyable. I think it changed my mind a little bit. One of the things that a lot of people have told me is Retribution Paladin is overpowered. And at first I thought, yes, I can agree, because I'm a rogue, they blow up rogues, what can I do? Bubble is pretty annoying to deal with, but after playing them for a bit and seeing how many classes can literally just obliterate you if you don't know what you're doing, yeah, it makes me think that Red Pally are pretty more or less balanced. I am getting destroyed by so many classes in the game, but I also have a lot of damage to set up too, so as long as I have my defensives, as long as I'm spending my holy power into either heal or damage, depending on how it's appropriate, I feel like the spec is fine. It was a nice surprise, a lot like to Fire Mage. I did not enjoy Fire Mage in Legion, but coming into BFA, I'm actually very much enjoying Red Pallies, and out of the classes that I want to play, I actually might end up leveling a Paladin as maybe my 4th or even 5th class. I'm not still quite sure what will follow Rogue, Hunter, and Warlock, but Paladin is on the list for me at this point. Alrighty, and the next class we got is Fury Warrior, and Fury Warrior, it's the same as the Arms Warrior. The GCD is killing me a little bit, just on the inside. The GCD is not a huge problem, it's not big, it's just, we felt for a while, at least for PvE, once we originally looked at Fury Warrior changes, it was the class that was the answer to the GCD troubles. So many classes are going on GCD, so many abilities you're going to have to use in order to get your damage rolling. It's going to feel so slow. And Fury Warriors, after the initial updates, felt like they were the answer. They were anti-GCD class. While playing them at 120, felt like the GCD is back to killing me again. It feels like it's slowing me down, and that feeling is not that great at first. That was very jarring to get used to. First of all, you don't really have any big burst cooldown damage buttons, and you don't have anything like, okay, let's just pop this button, now you're dealing insane amounts of damage. Mostly you just have a lot of abilities that are either rage builders and rage spenders. So if you don't want to play classes very tied to their cooldowns, very tied to big one-shot buttons, I feel like Fury will be a pretty good class for that. But the whole idea of I don't have any big buttons just to do damage, it feels really bad and really not that comfortable, I guess, at first, but I guess you get used to it after a while. What's awesome about Fury Warrior, and where it gets very exciting, is when Execute becomes a mechanic. Because it's kind of fun trying to get those enrage executes in there, whether it's an execute proc from a talent, or the enemy is actually low enough health where you can pop an execute onto them. So I feel like the specialization is really going to shine for PvE in particular, when bosses are close to dead. That's kind of where a lot of your damage is going to start coming out of, kind of oozing out of nowhere. But for PvP, I feel like it'll be an excitement that'll be kind of more or less seen sometimes, but not really all that much, because, you know, once somebody is low, generally one execute kind of does them in. It feels like the specialization is kind of almost like back to square one with this GCD stuff. I really cannot overstate it. It's not like it feels completely terrible and unplayable. There's a lot of people playing Fury Warrior. It's just for me though, after playing all these classes, after playing Demon Hunters, and after playing a little bit of Monks, and even how GCD those guys are, I feel like there's so many other classes that are doing the whole GCD thing better. If they are a class that's kind of selling themselves as, hey, don't worry about GCD, I'm kind of ignoring that mechanic more or less. Fury Warriors were a class that did that for a little bit, but at level 120, it kind of almost went back to, okay, now I'm back to having to auto-attack the enemy, I'm back to trying to stack up my abilities. It feels like I'm really rampy. Overall, this class felt like the rampiest one out of all the strength classes that I had. It's very strong, very decent, very reliable, but I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work for PvP because of its setup type of mechanic. I mean, there are some talents that can fix it, but I feel like just like with Frost Death Knight, if you feel you need a certain talent just to kind of fix the spec, then I think this maybe, if you need a talent just to make the spec function properly in certain situations and work, I feel like there's other specs that are doing just fine on their own, and talents kind of offer them a playstyle, a flavor of choice, or maybe certain unique capabilities, kind of as the player chooses. when you need certain talents, like when the talent is necessary to fix a spec, that's where it just doesn't feel quite as good. I wouldn't rate Fury low. They're kind of in the medium upper kind of area, but they're not terrible, not completely terrible at the very least. Lastly, we have the Unholy Death Knight, and this one was a little bit weird because I didn't really get too much time with this, and I felt that I don't really know where Unholy Death Knights are going to be from here on. It's like the warrior spec, right? You either have the arms or the fury, and most people gravitate to the strongest spec. I feel like with Death Knights, a lot of people are off the bat gonna gravitate to Frost Death Knight because it's so strong. But if you're somebody who wants to play Fury, if you're somebody who wants to play Frost or Unholy Death Knight, then please don't let it stop you. And especially if you're gonna play Unholy Death Knight. Because I felt like the playstyle for Unholy compared to Frost, it was actually kind of fun. The playstyle with real resources. It feels like you're very, very limited by resources. It could, of course, be my gear. I didn't stack too much haste into Unholy. I was not sure what stat I should stack for, but it was one of those situations where I stacked whatever stats I thought were good, and even if they were wrong stats, the spec still felt very, very fun to play. It almost felt like with the limited resources, you know, you don't always have runes always available, always have runic power. It almost feels like the decisions that you make in the moment are a lot more important. And on top of it, you also have fairly strong sustain auto attack damage. You have decent auto attack damage from your pet. Damage over time is also pretty good. So it feels like it gives you the time. The game is already doing the damage. So you already have the damage rolling on the enemy. It just gives you the time to kind of make and choose what you want to do. Do you want to use this ability or that ability? That's kind of very, very fun about the spec. Overall, felt like you had very, very strong dot damage and it was really, really cool. Again, also very, very strong sustain damage from the pet. I cannot overstate how sustained it is. It almost feels like there's no burst damage from the spec. It's more like, instead of burst damage, it's like a stronger pressure sustain damage, right? You just kind of ramp in a little bit the pressure of that sustain, and that's kind of how your burst plays, but it feels very, very smooth and very, very good. On PvE front, however, again, I feel like it'll be either Frost Death Knight will blow the competition away, or Unholy Death Knight will end up, you know, kind of outlasting the Frost DK burst damage. But it's very, very cool to play the spec. I really, really like what they did in terms of talents. I feel like there's a lot of different options of how you can play, and really like what Blizzard is doing around playing with dots, playing with runic power spenders, for example. I really like how they build up the spec. Especially an improvement from originally how it launched and was in really rough shape, but they understood that they basically Legion-fied the spec. They made it play around the artifact weapon, so as soon as they gave the artifact weapon back, it was all hunky-dory. Overall, I feel like, compared to Frost Death Knights, if you have to compare Unholy Death Knights, at least my abilities on Unholy feel like they deal appropriate amount of damage, you know. I don't have, you know, maybe like my dots doing no damage and then all of a sudden my festering strikes are doing insane amounts of damage, you know. Everything feels like it's moderate, it feels appropriate, so that felt really, really homey with the specialization compared to Frost Death Knight, where it feels like, okay, I'm just playing up to my rotation and my abilities are not doing anything. Alright, let me pop my burst and where'd their health go kind of deal. So I very, very much like that slow and steady playstyle for Unholy Death Knight. If I had to rate it maybe against Frost, I think Death Knights overall are going to be in the upper middle kind of area. I have to take a look at it again, but against Frost, it's like maybe they're just a inch, just a hair ahead of Frost if I had to choose personally. Overall, I think I genuinely enjoyed a lot of the strength classes. I feel like maybe I was a little bit harsh in terms of my, I guess, criticism of them and how I felt about them. But these classes are generally in a good shape that it was difficult for me to find something I didn't dislike. It's more like I'm giving criticism so that these specs can feel maybe a little bit better, at least from what my opinion is, because I want them to do well, because they're doing really well. I don't think there was a single specialization that I found to be in the lower tier out of strength classes, and that's something I can't say for casters, and even for some of the agility DPS, I did find some of them that are kind of like hard locked in mid tier. So this was actually pretty enjoyable. I enjoyed a lot of the strength classes. I don't think it's a playstyle for me. I do like the variety of the agility classes. I do like a little bit of casters. Maybe I'll stick around with a Paladin, maybe Arms Warrior here and there, maybe Unholy Death Knight. But I feel like it just might not be a playstyle for me. Overall, very enjoyable, and I think I would want to have at least one straight DPS class in order to at least enjoy some PvE and PvP kind of casually here on the side. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'd like to hear your guys' opinions on which classes did you enjoy and how would you rate them if you would. Which ones did you like the most? Was it the Paladins, the Death Knights, the Warriors, and which ones do you like the least? And do you agree or disagree with my listing, and how would you change it if you do disagree with it? Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I got some big videos coming on the way, so hopefully you guys will be excited for those. If you guys want to subscribe, hit the notification bell if you're going to do that, and I'll see all of you in another video.